The rain did not fall that night. It descended like a punishment. It was a rhythmic, violent drumming against the mahogany doors of the house I had called home for 35 years. To some, the sound of a storm is a lullaby, but to me, it was the sound of the sky bleeding, weeping for the tragedy unfolding in the foyer. His hands were cold. That was the first thing I noticed, the clinical, detached coldness of Adam's fingers as they clamped onto my shoulders. This was the boy I had carried for 9 months, the infant whose every fever I had fought with prayers and cold compresses, the man I had raised to be a pillar of strength. Now, that strength was being used to unmake me. "Adam, please," I whispered, though my voice was a ghost of itself, swallowed by the thunder that rattled the window panes. "Don't Adam me, Mother," he spat. The vitriol in his voice was sharper than the wind outside. He didn't look at me. He looked through me, as if I were a smudge on a lens he was desperate to wipe clean. "We've discussed this. The doctors say Sophia needs peace. She needs a home that doesn't feel like a museum of your expectations. She needs space to breathe." From the top of the stairs, a jagged, hollow sound drifted down. It was Sophia. Her cough was a dry, tearing thing, the sound of silk being ripped apart. Every time it echoed through the hallway, I felt a phantom pain in my own chest. She was dying, slowly, her body a battlefield for an enemy no medicine could truly conquer. My love for her was a quiet thing, deep and uncomplicated. She was the daughter I never had, the only person in this house who still looked at me with eyes that held light. And it was because of that cough that I didn't scream. It was because of that cough that I didn't fight back when Adam's grip tightened, turning his knuckles white. "You're hurting me, Adam," I said softly. He didn't flinch. He simply pivoted me toward the door. The physical sensation of being steered like a piece of unwanted furniture was a hollow, echoing shock. It wasn't the pain of his grip that broke me. It was the realization that I had become a stranger to my own flesh and blood. I was a nuisance, a liability, an obstacle in the path of his perceived heroism. "This house belongs to my wife now," he said, his voice dropping to a low, jagged hiss as he leaned into my ear. "It's hers. I've signed the papers. You're just a ghost from a past I want to forget, Mother. Every time Sophia looks at you, she feels the weight of your pity. She feels the shadow of your legacy. She doesn't need your legacy. She needs this roof." I felt the brass handle of the front door bite into the small of my back. He reached around me, his arm a barricade, and flung the door open. The storm rushed in like a predatory beast. The hallway, once warm with the scent of vanilla and old books, was instantly violated by the smell of ozone and wet earth. The rain splattered against the marble floor, the floor I had polished until it shone like a mirror. I looked at him then, really looked at him. I searched for the toddler who used to hide in the folds of my skirts. I searched for the teenager who cried on my shoulder when his heart was first broken. But those versions of Adam were gone, buried under layers of debt, pride, and a desperate, misplaced anger. He thought he was saving Sophia. He thought that by casting me out, he was making room for their future. He was so blindingly wrong that it felt like a physical weight in my stomach. "You have no idea what you're doing," I managed to say, the wind whipping my hair across my face. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he countered, pushing me across the threshold. "I'm taking back my life." One final, forceful shove. My heels skidded on the wet stone of the porch. I stumbled, my hand flying out to catch the pillar for support. The cold was instantaneous. Within seconds, my thin silk blouse was plastered to my skin, shivering against the sudden drop in temperature. Adam stood in the doorway, a silhouette of a man I no longer recognized. He reached into the pocket of my coat, the coat he had practically forced onto me, and pulled out my keychain. With a flick of his wrist, he detached the heavy silver key to the front door and tossed the rest of the keys at my feet. They clattered against the stone, a metallic, mocking sound. "Go to your sister's. Go to a hotel." "I don't care," he said, his face hardening. "Just don't come back here. Sophia needs to wake up in a house that belongs to her." He began to close the door. "Adam!" I cried out, a sudden, sharp panic rising in my throat. Not for myself, but for the truth I was carrying. He paused, the door half shut. "What?" I reached into the hidden inner pocket of my cardigan, my fingers brushing against a small, cold object. It was a heavy, old-fashioned key, the key to a private vault in the city's oldest bank. Inside that vault lay the deeds to the DA Legacy Holdings, the stocks that controlled the very company Adam was trying to save, and the legal documents that prove this house, and 3 others like it, were held in a trust that only I could dissolve. I could have stopped him. I could have held that key up and watched his world crumble. I could have told him that the debt he was drowning in was only a fraction of the wealth I was holding back, waiting for him to prove he was mature enough to handle it. I could have humiliated him, stripped him of his pride, and forced him to his knees on this very porch. But then, the sound came again from upstairs. Cough! 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 It was a sound of absolute fragility. If I destroyed Adam now, I would destroy Sophia's peace. She loved him. She believed he was her savior. If she knew that her husband was a thief who had just thrown his mother into a storm, the stress would kill her faster than the disease ever could. I looked at the key in my pocket, and then I looked at my son. In that moment, a terrible, beautiful clarity washed over me. Motherhood is not just about giving life. It is about the willingness to be the villain in your child's story if it means their world stays whole. It is about being the secret foundation that remains invisible so the house can stand. I let go of the key. I let my hand fall limp at my side. Take care of her, Adam, I said, my voice barely a whisper against the gale. Promise me you'll take care of Sophia. He scoffed, a sound of pure arrogance. I don't need your permission to love my wife. The door slammed shut. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the finality of a gavel. I was alone. The darkness of the garden pressed in on me, and the rain turned into a relentless assault. I stood there for a long time, my breath coming in ragged gasps, watching the light in the upstairs window, Sophia's room. I saw a shadow move behind the curtain. Adam. He was probably sitting by her bed now, playing the part of the devoted protector. He had won. He had his house, his pride, and his throne. I turned away from the house, my shoes squelching in the mud of the driveway. I had no umbrella, no car, and only a few bills in my purse. But as I walked toward the iron gates, the cold didn't feel as biting as it should have. There was a strange, numbing heat in my chest, the heat of a martyr's fire. He thought he had taken everything from me. He didn't realize that by throwing me out, he had given me the one thing I had been searching for, a way to save them without them ever knowing the cost. I reached the gates and looked back one last time. The grand estate looked like a tomb in the gray light of a storm. You want to be the master of this house, Adam? I whispered to the wind. Then be the master of an empty shell. I will be the ghost that keeps you alive from the gutters. I stepped out onto the main road, the asphalt black and slick like a river of oil. I didn't head for a hotel. I didn't call my lawyer. Instead, I began to walk toward the city center, toward the bridges where the forgotten people huddled for warmth. If I was to save Sophia, I had to become nobody. I had to disappear so that the money I sent would never be traced back to the mother he hated. I had to learn the language of the streets to ensure that every cent of my hidden life reached her bedside. The sky continued to bleed, and as I walked, the rain washed away the Diana who owned empires. In her place, a shadow began to grow, a woman who would beg for the very life her son had tried to throw away. The storm had just begun, but I was already the storm's daughter. The city at 3 a.m. is not a place, it is a predator. It breathes in the exhaust of late-night taxis and exhales a cold, indifferent mist that clings to the skin like a shroud. As I walked, my wet clothes grew heavy, a sodden weight that seemed determined to pull me down into the very pavement. My shivering had moved past the stage of trembling. It was now a deep, rhythmic convulsion, my bones vibrating against one another in a desperate, futile attempt to generate heat. I found my sanctuary beneath the 4th Street overpass. It was a cathedral of charcoal-colored concrete, a brutalist monument to a world that moved too fast to see what lay beneath its feet. Above me, the occasional car would thrum across the expansion joints, ba-dum, 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 a heartbeat of a society that had no pulse for me. The sound was hollow, a reminder that life was continuing at 60 miles per hour just 20 feet above my head, while I stood motionless in the shadows. I saw it then, leaning against a graffiti-stained pillar, a flattened refrigerator box, damp at the edges but relatively dry in the center. I reached out and touched it. The texture was a violent insult to my fingertips. For decades, my world had been defined by the tactile vocabulary of the elite. I knew the difference between 800 thread count Egyptian cotton and the inferior 600. I knew the cool, sliding caress of mulberry silk against my skin at night, sheets that smelled of lavender and French starch, tucked so tightly by the housemaids that getting into bed felt like being embraced by a cloud. Now, my fingers traced the corrugated ridges of waste paper. Cardboard. It was the skin of the discarded. I laid the box flat on the cold concrete, my movements slow and agonizing. As I sat down, the dampness of the ground immediately wicketed through the cardboard and into my skirt. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible, as if by occupying less space, I could somehow minimize the enormity of my shame. This was the first night. In the stories I used to read to Adam when he was a child, the first night of an adventure was always filled with stars and resolve. But in the reality of the gutter, the first night is simply a long, slow funeral for one's dignity. Dignity, I realized, is a luxury for the warm. It is a garment you wear when you are certain of your next meal. Out here, in the concrete sanctuary, dignity is the first thing that freezes and cracks. It falls away in brittle pieces until there is nothing left but the raw, pulsing instinct to survive. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, the roar of the traffic above transformed into the sound of the wind through the willow trees in our backyard. I could almost smell the roast lamb Adam loved so much, the rich aroma of rosemary and garlic wafting through the hallways of the mansion. I could see Sophia sitting in the sunroom, her pale face illuminated by the golden hour, a book resting forgotten on her lap as she watched the birds. A sudden, sharp gust of wind whipped under the bridge, tearing the memory away. I gasped, the cold air burning my lungs. I wasn't in the sunroom. I was a heap of wet fabric and aging bone, huddled in the dark. I reached for my purse, which I had clutched to my chest as if it held my very soul. My hands were so numb they felt like wooden blocks, clumsy and unresponsive. With trembling fingers, I fumbled with the clasp. It clicked, a small, sharp sound that felt like a sacrilege in the silence of the overpass. I dumped the contents onto the cardboard, a few crumpled bills, 5, 10, 20, and a handful of coins that caught the flickering orange glow of a distant street lamp. I counted them, my lips moving silently. Total, $84.67. My stomach let out a low, predatory growl. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the cold was burning through my caloric reserves like a forest fire. Just a few blocks away, there was a 24-hour diner. I could see the neon, open, sign humming in the distance. I could almost taste the hot coffee, the steam rising in a thick, mahogany velvet, the grease of a warm meal that would coat my throat and quiet the shivering. I looked at the money, $84. Then, I thought of the invoice I had seen on the kitchen counter 2 days ago, the one Adam had hidden under a pile of newspapers. It was from the St. Jude Respiratory Clinic. Balance overdue. It was for Sophia's experimental treatments, the ones that kept the fluid from filling her lungs, the ones that bought her the breath to say, I love you, to a husband who didn't deserve her. If Adam couldn't pay it, they would stop the treatments. They would send her home to die in the house he had stolen for her. I picked up the $20 bills, then the tens, then the fives. I stacked them neatly, smoothing out the wrinkles with the palm of my hand. I counted out $60. That, combined with my small monthly pension, which would be deposited into my secret account tomorrow, would be enough to cover this month's installment if I transferred it through the anonymous portal I had set up years ago as a charity fund. $24. That's what I had left for myself. I looked at the coins, the 67 cents. To a woman who once signed checks for millions, 67 cents was less than dust. But tonight, staring at them on a piece of damp cardboard, they were the difference between a loaf of bread and a slow death. I felt a tear escape my eye, hot and stinging against my frozen cheek. It wasn't a tear of self-pity. It was a tear of terrifying realization. I was no longer Diana, the matriarch. I was a ghost in the machine of my own empire. I took the $60 and tucked it into a separate compartment of my wallet. I would go to the automated teller in the morning, the one in the train station where the cameras were broken and the shadows were long. I would send the money. Sophia would receive a notification of an anonymous donor, and Adam would breathe a sigh of relief, thinking the universe was rewarding his strength. He would never know that the oxygen in his wife's lungs was paid for by the hunger in his mother's belly. Eat later, I whispered to myself, my voice cracking. You can eat tomorrow. But I knew tomorrow was a lie the homeless told themselves to keep from walking into the river. Tomorrow was just another version of today, only colder and hungrier. I pulled a discarded newspaper toward me, using it as a makeshift blanket. The headlines were a blur of political scandals and economic forecasts, the world of the living. I tucked the paper around my shoulders, feeling the thin, ink-stained sheets offer a pathetic, mocking warmth. Above me, a heavy truck thundered across the bridge, shaking the very foundation of my sanctuary. Dust and grit fell from the concrete ceiling, dusting my hair like gray snow. I didn't brush it off. I simply closed my eyes and leaned my head against the cold pillar. I had lost my house. I had lost my son. I had lost the very skin of my identity. But as the darkness of the first night finally began to swallow me whole, I felt the heavy, cold key to the DA legacy vault pressing against my hip from my inner pocket. I was the wealthiest beggar in the world. And as I drifted into a fitful, shivering sleep, I realized that this was my revenge, to give them everything while becoming nothing. To be the foundation they walked upon, never knowing that every step they took was supported by the woman they had left to rot in the rain. The concrete was hard, the cardboard was wet, and my heart was breaking, but Sophia would breathe another day. And for a mother, that was a sanctuary enough. 12 months. 365 cycles of the sun and moon have passed since the heavy mahogany door of my former life clicked shut, locking me out in the rain. A year is a long time for the comfortable, for the discarded. It is an eternity composed of seconds spent calculating the warmth of a breath or the value of a discarded crust of bread. I have become a master of the gray art, the art of being invisible. When I first arrived on these streets, I still carried the posture of a woman who commanded boardrooms. I walked with my chin up, my eyes seeking eye contact, my voice still holding the cadence of authority. But the city soon beat that out of me. To be seen is to be a target. To be invisible is to survive. I have learned to curve my spine until it mimics the arch of the bridge I sleep under. I have learned to dress in the colors of wet asphalt and soot-stained brick. I have learned that if you move slowly enough, if you keep your eyes cast downward, the world treats you like a static object, a fire hydrant, a trash bin, a crack in the sidewalk. People do not look at me anymore. They look past me, a collective glitch in their peripheral vision. They see a bundle of rags, a smudge of misfortune, but they never see Diana. Tonight, my feet, swollen and wrapped in strips of a floral bedsheet I found in a dumpster, have carried me back to the place that still haunts my dreams. I am standing in the throat of the narrow alleyway across from my old home. The shadows here are thick, smelling of damp stone and the metallic tang of garbage, but they provide the perfect veil. From here, I am a silent guardian. I lean against the cold brick wall, my hand instinctively going to my stomach. The hunger is no longer a sharp pain. It has evolved into a dull, rhythmic throb, a hollow ache that feels as though my body is slowly consuming its own history. I haven't eaten in 2 days. My last meal was a bruised apple and a handful of stale crackers given to me by a tired soul at a soup kitchen 3 miles away. My vision swims occasionally, dots of light dancing in the darkness, but I refuse to leave. Then it happens. The light in the second-story corner room, the room with the bay window, flickers on. A soft, amber glow spills out into the night, cutting through the gloom of the street. A figure moves behind the glass. It is Sophia. She is sitting in a high-backed armchair, the very one I bought for her when she first moved in. She looks pale, her skin almost translucent in the lamplight, and her movements are slow, burdened by the invisible weight of her illness. She adjusts a thick wool blanket over her lap, a blanket I sent through a courier 6 months ago using a name she wouldn't recognize. She lifts a glass of water to her lips and takes a sip. She is breathing. Her chest rises and falls with a steady, albeit fragile rhythm. At that moment, the agonizing emptiness in my stomach is suddenly irrelevant. The hollowness is filled with a different kind of substance, a luminous, aching joy. Every penny I have begged for, every insult I have swallowed from teenagers who spat near my feet, every night spent shivering until my teeth chipped, it was all for this. I am the reason she has that medicine. I am the reason she has that blanket. I am the reason she is not in a cold, sterile state ward, but in a room filled with amber light. My heart feels full, heavy with the terrifying weight of a love that requires no recognition. I am a ghost, yes, but I am a ghost that feeds her. But then, Another shadow enters the frame. Adam. He walks over to her, his expression softened by a tenderness he never showed me in those final months. He leans down and kisses her forehead, tucking the blanket tighter around her legs. He looks tired, his shoulders slumped, the arrogance of the man of the house replaced by the weariness of a man struggling to keep a sinking ship afloat. Seeing him causes a different kind of pain to flare up inside me. It is a phantom limb pain, the agonizing sensation of a part of yourself that has been violently amputated but still itches, still burns, still feels as though it should be there. Suddenly, I am not in a dark alley. I am 25 years in the past. The air is warm, smelling of mown grass and summer rain. A 5-year-old Adam is standing in the garden, his small, sticky hand gripped tightly around my index finger. He had tripped on a stone and scraped his knee, and the world for him was ending. "Mommy, don't let go," he had sobbed, his face buried in the fabric of my dress. "If you let go, I'll fall into the cracks of the world." I remember the exact pressure of his tiny fingers. I remember the fierce, primal vow I made in my heart that I would never let him fall. I was his anchor, his sun, his entire universe. I had spent 30 years being the ground beneath his feet, the walls around his dreams. I look at my hand now, the skin cracked and stained with the grime of the city, the fingernails broken and jagged. I can still feel the phantom pressure of that child's hand. The amputation was clean, performed with the sharp edge of his words on that stormy night, but the nerve endings of motherhood refused to die. They reach out into the empty air, searching for a son who was standing right there, just 50 feet away, yet on the other side of an infinite canyon. I am the one who fell into the cracks of the world, Adam. I fell so that you wouldn't have to. I watch him pour her a dose of medicine, the expensive, imported kind that I know costs more than a month of his current salary. He doesn't know that the charitable foundation that approved his emergency grant last month consists of one woman sleeping on cardboard. He thinks he is a hero, fighting the world to save his wife. He doesn't realize he is merely a puppet, and his mother is the one pulling the strings from the gutter. A cough racks my chest. I quickly press my tattered shawl to my mouth to stifle the sound, the force of it making my ribs ache. When I pull the cloth away, there is a dark, wet stain in the center. I am fading. I can feel my life force leaking out of me, traded away cent by cent, breath by breath. My health is the currency I am using to buy their time. Sophia looks toward the window then. For a terrifying, beautiful second, her eyes seem to lock onto the darkness of the alley where I stand. I freeze, holding my breath, my heart hammering against my fragile ribs like a trapped bird. Does she see me? Does she feel the gaze of a silent guardian? She lingers for a moment, a small, puzzled frown creasing her brow. Then, she smiles, a sad, distant smile, and turns back to Adam. She probably thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow playing games in the night. I sink down onto my haunches, my strength finally failing me. The brick wall is the only thing keeping me upright. I stay there long after the lights in the house go out, long after the street becomes a tomb of silence. The hunger in my stomach returns, sharper now, a gnawing reminder of my mortality. But as I begin the long, slow trek back to my bridge, I carry the image of Sophia's breathing with me. It is my bread. It is my water. I am Diana. I am a beggar. I am a ghost. But as long as that light flickers in that window, I am the most powerful woman in this city. I have lost my son's hand, but I have saved his soul, even if he has to lose mine to find it. I disappear into the fog, just another smudge of gray in a city that has forgotten how to look. The accounting of the destitute is a brutal mathematics. There are no spreadsheets, no leather-bound ledgers, no mahogany desks. My ledger is written in the ache of my joints and the calluses on my palms. It is a tally of aluminum cans dragged from the depths of grease-stained dumpsters, of copper wire stripped from the skeletons of abandoned buildings, and the meager, automated drip of a pension that once served as my pocket change, but now serves as a lifeline for a woman who doesn't know I exist. I call it the ledger of blood and pennies. Every cent is a drop of my remaining vitality, a small piece of my flesh converted into the cold, sterile currency of survival. This morning, the air is a jagged blade of ice that cuts through my layers of mismatched wool. I am walking toward the local post office, the one on the edge of the financial district, where the marble is polished to a mirror sheen and the air smells of expensive cologne and efficiency. It is a world I once owned, A world that now treats my presence like a stain on a white silk tie. I clutch my tattered bag to my chest. Inside, wrapped in a plastic grocery sack to keep it dry, is the harvest. $82 in wrinkled 5-pound notes and copper coins, plus the notification from my burner phone that my monthly pension of $400 has cleared my secret account. To the people walking past me, I am a heap of mobile trash. I can see them tensing as I approach, their bodies instinctively veering away to maintain the invisible 5-foot squalor radius that surrounds me. I have learned to live in that radius. It is my armor. I push open the heavy glass door of the post office. The chime above the door sounds like a funeral bell. Immediately, the atmosphere changes. The air-conditioned warmth hits me, and with it, the release of my own scent. I know what I smell like. I smell of damp cardboard, of wood smoke from illegal barrels, of the sourness of a body that hasn't seen a hot bath in months. I smell of the street. I shuffle toward the counter, my head bowed. I can feel the eyes of the other patrons on me, the businessmen in their tailored suits, the young mothers with their pristine strollers. Their silence is a loud, ringing condemnation. I reach the window. The clerk is a young man, perhaps 24, with a face that hasn't yet been hardened by the world. But as I approach, I watch his features reorganize themselves into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. His nose crinkles, his upper lip curling back as if he has just stepped on something rotting. He pulls a handkerchief from his pocket and subtly, he thinks, covers his mouth. "Next," he says, his voice muffled and flat. I place the plastic bag on the counter. The sound of the coins clinking against the granite is loud in the quiet room. "I need to make a wire transfer," I say. My voice is a dry rasp, a sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "To the St. Jude Respiratory Clinic. Account number 1992. Anonymous donor." The clerk looks at the plastic bag, then at me. His eyes skip over my face, refusing to land on my features, as if looking directly at me might make my poverty contagious. He picks up a pen with the tips of his fingers, his touch so light it's as if he's handling toxic waste. "This is all cash?" he asks, his voice dripping with condescension. "Yes," I whisper. $82. And I need to authorize the electronic transfer from the attached card for the remaining $400. He sighs, a long, dramatic sound intended to let everyone in line know how much of a burden I am. He begins to count the money, his fingers moving with a frantic speed, desperate to finish the task and get me away from his station. He treats the coins as if they are diseased, sliding them across the counter with a plastic ruler rather than touching them. He doesn't know that these $82 are the result of 30 days of hunger. He doesn't know that I have walked 12 miles in shoes that have no soles to save the bus fare for this transaction. He doesn't know that the $400 from the pension is the only thing keeping me from a bed in a shelter where the bedbugs and the violence are the only company. Above all, he doesn't know that the disgusting beggar standing before him is the single largest private benefactor to the clinic's experimental wing. If I stopped coming, the wing would close. The machines would be unplugged. The oxygen would stop flowing. "Receipt?" he asks, shoving a piece of thermal paper toward me. He doesn't wait for me to take it. He drops it on the counter and immediately reaches for a bottle of hand sanitizer, pumping a large glob into his palms and rubbing them together with a feverish intensity. "Thank you," I say softly. As I turn to leave, a sudden, violent tickle begins in the base of my throat. I try to suppress it, swallowing hard, but it is a tide that cannot be held back. I begin to cough. It is a deep, racking sound, a wet, tearing noise that echoes off the marble walls. My vision blurs as my lungs struggle to find air. I double over, my hands catching the edge of a writing desk to keep from falling. Hacking, gasping, tearing. In the silence between the spasms, I hear a woman in line whisper to her companion, "Good God, someone should call the health department. She's probably spreading TB." I finally catch my breath, my chest burning as if I've swallowed hot coals. I wipe my mouth with the back of my hand, and for a moment I freeze. The sound, that specific, hollow, jagged rattle. I have heard it before. I heard it every night for years from the upstairs bedroom of the mansion. It is the exact sound of Sophia's cough. A cold realization washes over me, more chilling than the wind outside. I am no longer just paying for Sophia's medicine with my money. I am paying for it with my biology. The dampness of the bridge, the lack of nutrition, the relentless cold, they have mimicked the very destruction happening inside her. I am literally trading my breath for hers. For every deep, clear breath Sophia takes in that amber-lit room, I take a shallow, fluid-filled gasp in the shadows. My lungs are becoming a map of her suffering, a mirror image of her decay. It is the ultimate exchange rate, one life for another. I straighten my back as much as the pain allows. I do not look at the disgusted clerk or the whispering patrons. I walk out of the post office and back into the gray light of the street. My stomach screams for food. There is a bakery next door, and the scent of fresh sourdough is an agonizing torture. I have 6 cents left in my pocket. 6 cents. I look at the receipt in my hand. Transaction confirmed, $482. Recipient, St. Jude Respiratory Clinic. That money will buy the high-dosage corticosteroids. It will buy the specialized nebulizer treatments. It will buy 30 days of life for the woman my son loves. I feel a strange, weary peace. My body is failing, yes. My health is a candle burning at both ends, and the wick is nearly gone. But as I walk back toward my concrete sanctuary, I realize that this is the most honest work I have ever done. In my old life, I built empires out of paper and ambition. In this life, I am building a future out of my own bones. I am a mother, and a mother's ledger is never balanced until she has given everything, until the last penny is spent and the last breath is exhaled. I stop at a public fountain and drink the cold, metallic water until the fire in my throat subsides. I look at my reflection in the rippling surface. I don't see Diana the CEO. I don't see Diana the beggar. I see a bridge that Adam and Sophia are walking across to reach a shore I will never touch. Breathe well, Sophia, I whisper to the water. I have enough air for both of us for now. I turn and disappear into the crowd, a ghost moving through a world of the living, carrying my ledger of blood and pennies toward the only end that matters. The night air in the financial district is different from the air under the bridge. It doesn't smell of damp earth or desperation. It smells of ozone, expensive filtered oxygen, and the cold, metallic scent of absolute power. I am standing at the corner of 5th and Madison, my back pressed against a cold street lamp, staring upward until my neck aches. There it is, the glass fortress. 50 stories of reinforced steel and tempered glass, stabbing into the charcoal sky like a jagged diamond. At the very summit, 2 massive letters glow in a soft, ethereal blue DA. Diana and Adam. Or as the world knows it, DA Legacy Holdings. To the thousands of employees currently sleeping in their suburban homes, those letters represent stability, a paycheck, and a titan of industry. To the city, they are a landmark. But to me, as I stand here with mud caked under my fingernails and a stomach that has forgotten the taste of warm bread, those letters are a gravestone for the woman I used to be. I close my eyes, and the sound of the passing sirens fades into the muffled silence of a mahogany-lined study 10 years ago. The scent of Arthur's expensive Cuban cigars still lingered in the air, a ghostly reminder of the man who had been my compass for 4 decades. He had been gone for only 3 days. The lawyer, a man named Henderson, whose hair was as silver as the fountain pens he used, sat across from me. Adam sat to my right. I remember watching Adam's hands. They weren't folded in grief. They were twitching. His fingers were dancing on the leather armrest of a chair, a frantic, rhythmic tapping of a man waiting for a race to begin. He wasn't looking at the portrait of his father. He was staring at the thick, cream-colored envelope on Henderson's desk. "To my wife, Diana," Henderson began, his voice a somber drone. "I leave the totality of my voting shares, the chairmanship of DA Legacy, and the final authority over all trust distributions." The tapping of Adam's fingers stopped instantly. The silence that followed was more violent than a scream. "And what about me?" Adam's voice had been thin, vibrating with a suppressed hunger that turned my blood to ice. "The vice presidency, the expansion funds. Father promised." "Your father promised you a future, Adam," I had interrupted, reaching out to touch his arm. "But he left me the keys to ensure you don't burn that future down before you're ready to live in it." He had pulled his arm away as if my touch were a leper's. In that moment, I saw it, a flash of something predatory in my son's eyes. It wasn't the ambition of a builder, it was the greed of a consumer. He didn't want to lead the company, he wanted to harvest it. He wanted the fast cars, the headlines, the thrill of spending what he hadn't earned. I knew then, with a mother's devastating intuition, that if I handed him the crown that day, he would be bankrupt within 5 years, and the legacy Arthur built would be nothing but a footnote in a bankruptcy court. So I lied. I told him the company was struggling. I told him the shares were locked in a 10-year probate. I kept the CEO chair, but operated from the shadows, letting the board think I was a figurehead while I made every surgical decision to keep us afloat. I let Adam believe he was working his way up, all while I was secretly shielding the heart of the empire from his impulsiveness. I hid the crown in the dirt, thinking I was protecting him from himself. I didn't realize that by denying him the gold, I was feeding a resentment that would eventually lead him to drag me out into a storm. A harsh voice breaks my reverie. "Move it along, lady. No loitering in front of the lobby." I open my eyes. A security guard stands 3 feet away, his hand resting on his belt. He is young, his uniform crisp, his shoes polished to a shine that mirrors the lobby's marble floor. He looks at me with the weary annoyance one might reserve for a stubborn pigeon. He has no idea. He doesn't know that the very shoes he's wearing were likely paid for by a Christmas bonus I authorized from a cardboard box 6 months ago. He doesn't know that the deed to this entire city block bears my signature in a vault 3 levels beneath his feet. "I'm going," I say, my voice a dry, papery whisper. I turn away, my heart heavy with the weight of my secret sovereignty. This is the irony of my existence. I am a secret queen living in the dirt. I wear a crown of thorns and soot, yet I own the skyline I sleep under. There is a strange, intoxicating power in this poverty. In the boardroom, my power was transactional. It was based on balance sheets and quarterly reports. But here, on the pavement, my power is absolute. I am the silent god of Adam's world. I allow him to live in the mansion. I allow him to sit in the office upstairs. I allow him the illusion of being a man of means, all while I suffer the reality of his failure. I walk past the massive plate glass windows of the lobby. Inside, I see my reflection, a distorted, flickering image. I see a woman whose face is a map of seasons spent outdoors, whose hair is a nest of gray straw, whose coat is held together by hope and grime. But behind that reflection, inside the building, I see the bronze bust of Arthur in the center of the foyer. "We did it, Arthur," I think, a ghostly smile touching my cracked lips. The company is safe. He hasn't sold the shares. He hasn't liquidated the trust. He thinks he's broke, so he's finally learning the weight of a dollar. I continue walking, leaving the glow of the DA logo behind. Every step away from the tower feels like a physical tearing, a separation of the soul from its body. My body belongs to the bridge, to the cold, to the hunger. But my soul is the glass fortress. I reach the entrance to the subway, where the hot, stale air of the tunnels rises up to meet me. This is my throne room for the night, a concrete bench near the tracks where the trains scream past like iron dragons. I reach into my inner pocket and feel the heavy, cold key. It is the only thing I have left of my old life, and it is the most dangerous thing I own. It is the key to the truth. One turn of that key in the right lock, and I could be back in a silk bed by morning. I could have Adam arrested, Sophia moved to the best private island in the world, and a legion of servants to wash the street off my skin. But I don't, because if I take back my life, I take away Adam's lesson. And more importantly, I take away the anonymity that allows me to pay for Sophia's life without the stain of my pity destroying her spirit. I lie down on the bench, using my bag as a pillow. The concrete is unforgiving, a cold pressure against my thinning ribs. I am Diana. I am the owner of the DA legacy. I am the architect of the skyscraper that touches the clouds. And tonight, I will sleep on a pile of old newsprint, listening to the rats scurry in the dark. The crown is heavy. It is made of lead and silence. But as I close my eyes, I see the soft blue glow of the logo in the back of my eyelids. Sleep well, my children, I whisper into the roar of the midnight train. The ghost is watching. The queen is in her counting house, and all is well. I drift into a dream of glass and gold, while the real world continues to walk over me, never knowing they are treading on the very heart of their city. On the streets, news doesn't arrive via a sleek tablet or a morning briefing over artisanal coffee. It arrives as a dirty, wind-whipped herald, a discarded evening edition tumbling down a gutter, or a frantic, flickering image on a wall of televisions in an electronics store window. To the world, It is a headline. To me, it is the sound of the final wall of my son's vanity collapsing into the dust. I found the news on a Tuesday, wrapped around a soggy carton of fries. Heir to DA legacy subsidiary declares bankruptcy. Mansion seized. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs more effectively than any cough. I sank onto a public bench, my hands trembling so violently that the newspaper rattled like dry bones. The mansion. The house with the willow trees. The house where I had measured Adam's height against the kitchen doorframe for 18 years. The house he had dragged me out of just a year ago. Gone. Adam had done exactly what I feared. In his desperate, ego-driven attempt to prove he didn't need my probate-locked wealth, he had leveraged everything. He had gambled on high-risk volatility markets, trying to turn a small fortune into a mountain of gold overnight. He wanted to be the king I wouldn't let him be. Instead, he had become the architect of his own ruin. A localized earthquake of guilt erupted in my chest. I could have stopped this. A voice whispered in the back of my mind, the voice of the mother who used to fix every broken toy and soothe every scraped knee. I could have walked into that house a month ago, produced the deeds, and settled his debts with a single signature. I could have saved the roof over Sophia's head. I could have brought them back from the brink. My hand instinctively dove into the hidden pocket of my rags, my fingers locking around the cold, heavy brass of the vault key. It felt like a live coal, searing my skin with the temptation of intervention. Save him, Diana. He's your son. Don't let him sleep where you sleep. I stood up, my heart racing. I began to walk, not toward the bridge, but toward the city's legal district. I would find Henderson. I would end the charade. I would reclaim the throne and bring my boy home. But then, I stopped in front of Bernie's Electronics. A crowd had gathered around the display window. A dozen television screens were tuned to the local news. And there, filling the glass in a dozen different angles, was Adam. He was standing on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by a swarm of reporters with microphones, thrust toward his face like bayonets. He looked disheveled. His expensive silk tie was knotted crookedly, his hair was a nest of stress, and his eyes, those eyes that used to be so full of light, were bloodshot and wild. "Mr. Sterling, is it true the banks have locked the gates of the estate?" a reporter shouted. "This is a witch hunt." Adam roared back, his voice cracking with a high-pitched, desperate frequency. He didn't look like a man in mourning for his life. He looked like a man insulted by reality. "My brokers lied to me. The market was manipulated. My mother left the company in a state of hidden rot that I've been trying to fix for a year. This isn't my failure. I was betrayed by everyone I trusted. I stood there, a nameless beggar in a tattered shawl, watching my son lie to the world and to himself. The heat in my chest, the urge to save him, instantly turned to ash. He hadn't learned. A year of struggle, of watching Sophia wither, of losing the very walls he stole, and he still had not discovered the concept of a mirror. To Adam, the world was a series of external conspiracies designed to thwart his greatness. If I stepped in now, if I saved him with a check and a mansion, I wouldn't be saving my son. I would be feeding the parasite of his arrogance. If I gave him back the house today, he would lose it again tomorrow, and he would blame the wind for blowing too hard. "Look at that loser," a young man standing next to me muttered to his girlfriend. "Inherited a fortune and pissed it away, and now he's blaming his dead mother." "Actually," I whispered, though they didn't hear me, "she's standing right here." I watched Adam push his way through the crowd, shielding his face from the cameras as he ducked into a cheap taxi. He wasn't going to a mansion. He was going to a rented, 2-room apartment in a part of town where the sirens never stop. He was heading toward the ground. I felt a tear, cold and heavy, track through the grime on my cheek. It is a terrible thing for a mother to realize that the only way to save her child is to let him hit the concrete. Gravity is the only teacher Adam will ever listen to. He has spent his entire life walking on the clouds I built for him, thinking he was flying. Now, the clouds are gone. He needs to feel the hardness of the earth. He needs to understand that the ground doesn't care about his name or his excuses. He must learn the value of the dirt. I thought, my grip on the vault key loosening. Because only when you have nothing left but the dirt do you realize that you are the one who has to build the foundation. The internal conflict was a jagged saw, cutting me in half. One half of me wanted to run to that cramped apartment, bring Sophia a basket of real food, and tell Adam that everything would be okay. The other half, the silent guardian, knew that okay was a lie that had stunted his soul. I looked at the television screens one last time before they shifted to a weather report. Adam's face was replaced by a map of incoming storms. "I'm sorry, Adam," I whispered to the glass. "I love you enough to let you lose everything." I turned away from the bright lights of the electronics store and began the long walk back to my overpass. The city felt larger tonight, more predatory. The news of the mansion's seizure meant that the anonymous money I was sending to Sophia would be more critical than ever. Now I wasn't just paying for her breath. I was likely paying for the very bread on their table. As I walked, I noticed a group of men huddled around a fire in a trash barrel. They were laughing, sharing a single cigarette. They had nothing, yet they had a strange, weathered solidarity. They knew the ground. They respected it. I sat down in my concrete sanctuary, pulling my cardboard skin around me. My cough returned, a wet, rattling reminder that my own time was a dwindling currency. The house was gone. The willow trees would be pruned by strangers. The mahogany doors I had polished would be opened by keys I didn't own. It felt like my heart was being dismantled, brick by brick. But as I laid my head down, I realized that the DA legacy wasn't the building or the money. The legacy was the lesson. I am Diana. I am a mother who has become a ghost so that my son can finally become a man. I will watch him beg. I will watch him cry. I will watch him realize that he is small. And I will do it all from the shadows, with a heart that is breaking and a hand that refuses to reach out. The walls have crumbled, Adam. Now, let's see what you build with the ruins. I closed my eyes, the sound of the city traffic above me sounding like the distant, rhythmic thud of a heart that was finally, painfully, beginning to beat. The park was a symphony of things I no longer possessed. Laughter, the scent of expensive roasting coffee, and the effortless movement of people who still believe the world was a kind place. I sat on the periphery, a tattered silhouette against the wrought iron fence, my back against the cold metal bars that separated the manicured lawn from the grease-slicked sidewalk. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long, skeletal shadows across the path, and my hand, thin, trembling, and stained with the soot of a dozen sleepless nights, was extended. It was an instinctive gesture now, a reflex of the flesh that my pride had long ago stopped trying to veto. I saw him before he saw me, or rather, I saw him before he chose to look past me. Adam was walking with a frantic, jagged gait. He was wearing a suit that had once been the height of Italian tailoring, but it was now wrinkled and shiny at the elbows, a garment mourning its own prestige. He held a leather briefcase as if it were a shield, his knuckles white, his eyes darting toward the high-rise buildings across the street. He looked like a man chasing a miracle, a man convinced that if he just reached the right office or spoke to the right ghost of his father's past, the ground would stop shaking beneath his feet. As he drew closer, my heart performed a violent, rhythmic thrumming against my ribs. I felt the phantom pressure of his childhood hand in mine, a memory so vivid it nearly forced a name from my throat. I leaned forward, my shadow falling across his polished but scuffed shoes. My hand remained outstretched, a silent bridge between the empress and the beggar. "Please," I rasped, the word barely a puff of gray mist in the autumn air. "Help a mother." Adam didn't even break his stride. He didn't flinch. He didn't look down. He simply pivoted his body slightly to avoid the obstruction of my existence. To him, I wasn't a woman, certainly not his mother. I was a piece of urban debris, a temporary inconvenience in the geometry of his afternoon. I saw his jaw clench, a flash of annoyance crossing his face as if my request for a penny was a personal insult to his own struggle for millions. The irony was a jagged blade, twisting in my chest. There he was, sweating under the weight of his debts, his mind a whirlwind of interest rates and foreclosure notices, desperately seeking a lifeline. And there I was, sitting at his very feet, the literal source of the life he was trying to save, the owner of the vault that could erase his misery with a single stroke of a pen. The miracle he was praying for was less than 3 feet away from him, wrapped in a dirty shawl and smelling of the bridge, yet his arrogance was a blindfold he had tied himself. He walked on, his figure receding into the crowd, a man drowning in a shallow pool because he refused to stand up. But then, the air seemed to thin. Behind him, a few paces back, a hired attendant was pushing a wheelchair. It was Sophia. She looked smaller than she had through the window of the mansion. The hospital-grade blanket I had anonymously funded was tucked around her, but her frame seemed to have shrunk, her face a pale, exquisite porcelain that looked as though it might shatter if the wind blew too hard. She wasn't looking at the skyscrapers or the briefcase. She was looking at the ground, her eyes wide and filled with a quiet, observant sorrow. The attendants slowed as they approached the gate where I sat. Our eyes met. Time didn't stop. It simply ceased to matter. Sophia looked at me, and for the first time in a year I felt seen. She didn't see the dirt, or at least, she didn't look at it the way the others did. She didn't recoil. Her gaze was steady, piercing through the layers of soot and the mask of my poverty. In that moment, I saw a flicker in her eyes, a spark of recognition that stole the breath from my lungs. She didn't recognize me as Diana, the woman who had presided over her wedding dinner. My face was too sunken, my hair too white, my essence too eroded for that. But she recognized something else. She recognized the soul. She saw the familiar shape of a sacrifice she couldn't quite name. It was as if two survivors of the same shipwreck had found each other on a crowded street. She reached out a thin, trembling hand from beneath her blanket, her fingers hovering in the air toward me. Her lips parted, perhaps to speak, perhaps to call out to the ghost she sensed in the rags. "Sophia, we're going to be late." Adam's voice barked from 20 yards ahead, sharp and impatient. He didn't look back. He just waved a hand for the attendant to hurry. The flicker in Sophia's eyes died, replaced by a dull, obedient haze. The attendant pushed the chair forward, and the moment was severed. But as she moved past, Sophia dropped something. It wasn't a coin. It was a small, white flower she had been holding, a carnation, slightly wilted at the edges. It fell onto my lap, a splash of pure, impossible white against the gray of my skirt. I clutched the flower to my chest, the scent of it a sweet, agonizing reminder of the garden I had lost. I watched them disappear into the blur of the city, my son, the blind prince chasing shadows, and his wife, the silent witness to my slow-motion suicide. I sank back against the cold iron bars, my body suddenly feeling its full weight. The irony was no longer stinging, it was crushing. I was the unrecognized ghost of their feast, the secret donor of their every breath, sitting in the dirt while they walked over me toward a ruin I had already paid to prevent. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of the wilted carnation. I was hungry, I was cold, and my lungs were heavy with the fluid of a borrowed sickness. But as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the park in shadow, I felt a strange, hollow triumph. Adam hadn't looked at me, and that was his curse. Sophia had looked at me, and that was her gift. I would stay here. I would stay in the dirt, invisible and forgotten, because as long as I was the unrecognized ghost, they were still alive. The flower in my hand was the only currency I needed to survive the night. The fourth winter did not arrive with the soft grace of falling snow. It arrived as a sharpened obsidian blade, carving the warmth from the world until only the brittle bones of the city remained. In the previous years, I had thought I knew the cold. I thought I had bargained with the frost and won. But this year, the sky has turned a bruised, permanent gray, and the wind howls through the concrete canyons like a pack of starving wolves. I am dying. I say this not with fear, but with the weary, clinical observation of a bookkeeper looking at a final balance sheet. The numbers no longer add up. My fingers, once capable of playing Chopin and signing million-dollar mergers, are now grotesque, blackened things. Frostbite has claimed the tips of my left hand, a dull, throbbing ache that eventually gave way to a terrifying, hollow numbness. I look at my hands and I do not recognize them. They are the claws of a winter-hunted animal. The cough, too, has changed. It is no longer a visitor, it is the master of the house. Every breath is a negotiation, a raspy, bubbling struggle that tastes of iron and salt. My lungs feel like they are filled with wet wool, heavy and cold. I am literally trading my remaining air for Sophia's. Each time I hear the news of her miraculous stabilization by the radio in the public library, I feel a rib-cracking spasm of pain, a physical toll for the life I am sustaining from a distance. I found a scrap of discarded stationery in the bin behind a hotel, thick, cream-colored paper that felt like a relic from another galaxy. Using a stub of a pencil I found near a school, I sat in the dim light of a flickering subway lamp to write my final decree. Henderson, I wrote, my handwriting a jagged, drunken scrawl compared to the elegant script of my former life. When this letter reaches you, it will mean my heart has finally stopped. Do not mourn me. Do not look for my body in the potter's field. Simply execute the final clause of the DA Legacy Trust. Give Adam the keys. Tell him everything. But only after Sophia is standing on her own 2 feet. Let her be my final masterpiece. I folded the paper with my stiff, blue fingers, the effort bringing a fresh wave of coughing that left me slumped against the tiled wall. I tucked the letter into an envelope I had saved, addressed to my lawyer, and wrote in bold, desperate letters, "To be delivered only upon the death of the undersigned." I gave it to a young, kind-eyed priest at the mission, along with $5, the last of my begging money, to ensure he would keep it safe until the end. The end. It felt so close I could smell it, a scent of ozone and old, tired earth. But then, the radio at the mission delivered the blow that shattered my peace. The St. Jude Respiratory Clinic had exhausted the experimental funds. Sophia required one last, radical surgery to repair the scarring in her lungs. Without it, the stabilization would only last another month. The cost was astronomical, more than my pension could cover in a year. I sat on my cardboard mat that night, the cold seeping through my thinning flesh, and I looked at the very last piece of Diana that remained. Under the grime, under the layers of rags and the stench of the street, it was still there. I had kept it hidden for 4 years. I had sucked on it during the hungriest nights, imagining I could taste the love that had placed it there. My wedding ring. It was a simple, heavy band of platinum, set with a single, flawless diamond that Arthur had chosen because he said it matched the clarity of my soul. It was the symbol of 30 years of laughter, of the night Adam was born, of the empire we had built together from a small office in a basement. It was my identity. As long as I wore it, I was still a wife. I was still a mother. I was still human. If I sold it, I would be nothing. I would be just another nameless shadow in the dirt. The walk to the pawn shop was a pilgrimage of sorrow. The store was a cramped, yellow-lit cave filled with the ghosts of other people's failures, violins, watches, gold teeth, and dreams. The man behind the plexiglass looked at me with a bored, practiced cruelty. "What ya got, Granny?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rasp. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I simply reached into the folds of my shawl and pulled out the ring. I laid it on the velvet tray. The diamond caught the flickering neon light of the We Buy Gold sign, flashing with a brilliant, defiant light that seemed to scream against the filth of the counter. The man's eyes widened. He picked it up with a jeweler's loop, his breath hitching. He knew what it was. He knew it was worth 10 times the amount he was about to offer. "I can give you 5,000, he said, his voice trying to remain flat. "That's the best I can do for street fines." The ring was worth 50,000, at least. But I didn't have the time to haggle, and I didn't have the dignity to fight. I needed that surgery paid for by dawn. "Keep it," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Just send the money to the clinic. Now." Under the name, the Silent Guardian. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something like shame in his eyes. He nodded slowly. As I walked out of the shop, my hand felt terrifyingly light. I kept rubbing my ring finger with my thumb, feeling the indentation where the band had sat for 3 decades. The skin there was pale, protected from the soot by the metal that was now gone. I felt a hollow, echoing grief, a sense that I had finally, truly died. I went to the clinic that night. I didn't go inside. I sat on the frozen sidewalk across the street, watching the lights of the surgical wing. I knew she was in there. I knew that my wedding ring was currently being transformed into scalpels, anesthesia, and the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. I am empty now. I have no house, no son, no name, and no ring. I am a ghost that has given away its last haunting. The snow began to fall, a soft, white shroud that settled over my shoulders. My breath was coming in short, jagged gasps, each one a victory over the fluid in my chest. I leaned my head against the cold brick of the building opposite the clinic. I felt the end brushing against me, a gentle, freezing hand. "I gave you everything, Adam," I thought, my eyes drifting shut. "I gave you the world, and then I gave you my life, and finally, I gave you my love for your father. I hope you're happy. I hope she breathes deep tomorrow." The cold was no longer an enemy. It was a blanket, and as the world began to fade into a soft, silent white, I realized that I wasn't losing a battle. I was winning. I had successfully traded every single thing I was to ensure that they could be. I am Diana. I am a mother. And I have nothing left to give but my last, shivering breath. 5 years. The number sounds like a small thing, a mere handful of calendar pages fluttering in the wind. But in the life of a ghost, 5 years is a geologic epoch. It is the time it takes for a mountain to crumble into sand, for a river to change its course, and for a woman of status to become indistinguishable from the grime of the city. I am slumped against the cold, unyielding granite base of the DA Legacy headquarters. Above me, the glass fortress reaches for the stars, its blue neon logo, the initials of my life, pulsing like a slow, indifferent heart. The wind here is a specialized cruelty. It funnels between the skyscrapers, gaining speed and ice until it bites through my 3 layers of scavenged coats. My breath is a thin, rattling vapor, a ghost of a sound that seems to mock the silence of the street. I am tired, not the tiredness that sleep can cure, but a structural fatigue, a feeling that my very soul is fraying at the edges. A few feet away from me, another shadow has taken up residence. He arrived an hour ago, shuffling into the alcove with the hesitant, jerky movements of someone who is still new to the architecture of the gutter. He is wrapped in a gray, oil-stained tarp, his feet bound in plastic bags held together with duct tape. He hasn't learned the gray art yet. He still moves with a frantic, desperate energy, his eyes darting toward every pair of polished shoes that clicks past our corner. He holds out a battered tin cup, his voice a low, ashamed mumble that is swallowed by the roar of the city traffic. I watched him from the shadows of my hood, my eyes, filmed with the cataracts of age and the haze of pneumonia, struggled to focus. But as the street lamp flickered into life, the orange light caught the profile of his face. My heart didn't beat, it staggered. It was a mother's recognition, a primal frequency that bypassed the brain and struck directly at the marrow. The man sitting in the dirt, begging for pennies at the feet of his own empire, was Adam. He was unrecognizable to the world. The Prince of DA Legacy had been replaced by a hollow-cheeked specter. His hair, once perfectly coiffed, was a matted nest of silver and grease. His hands, the hands that had once pushed me into a storm, were covered in the same weeping sores that plagued mine. But it was his eyes that broke me. They were the same eyes that had looked at me from a cradle 35 years ago, only now they were extinguished, filled with the flat, gray ash of a man who had lost his center. My heart broke for the second time. The first time was when he betrayed me. This time was worse. This was the sight of my son as a victim of his own pride. I had wanted him to learn the value of the ground, but seeing him actually eating the dust was a pain that made the frostbite in my fingers feel like a caress. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to scream his name. I wanted to pull his head onto my lap and tell him that the DA above us was still his, that I had saved it all for him. But I remained a statue of soot and silence. The night deepened. The theater crowds thinned, and the donations to our corner stopped. Adam pulled the tarp tighter around his shivering frame. He looked over at me, his gaze lingering on my tattered shawl. He didn't see a mother. He saw a competitor. He saw another piece of the urban landscape. "Rough night, huh?" he muttered. His voice was a jagged ruin of the confident baritone it used to be. I didn't answer. I simply nodded. The movement sent a spike of pain through my neck. He let out a short, bitter laugh that turned into a hacking cough, a sound so similar to mine that it felt like a shared sentence. He leaned back against the granite, staring up at the blue logo 50 stories above. "You see that building?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp with a toxic, festering resentment. "The DA up there?" I tilted my head, my heart hammering against my fragile ribs. "I used to own that," he said, his words dripping with a delusional grandeur. "I used to own a mansion with willow trees. I had cars. I had respect. I was a king once." He spat onto the sidewalk, the fluid dark in the lamplight. "My mother ruined me," he continued, the words coming out in a hissed torrent of blame. "She was a cold, manipulative bitch. She hid the money. She locked the trusts. She watched me struggle and didn't lift a finger. She's probably sitting in some luxury penthouse in Europe right now, sipping champagne while I rot on the street. She was a ghost who only cared about her legacy, never her own blood." He turned his head toward me, his eyes wide and wild with the need for a witness to his victimhood. "Can you imagine that? A mother who throws her own son to the wolves just to keep her hoard? She's a monster. If I ever see her again, I'll tell her that her legacy is built on the bones of the son she destroyed. The stinging irony was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I couldn't draw air. I sat there, less than 3 feet from him, the very monster he was describing. I sat there in the same rags, breathing the same cold air, dying of the same hunger. I was the woman who had traded her wedding ring to save his wife's life. I was the woman who had spent 5 years under a bridge so that his debts wouldn't consume the very company he was now leaning against. I looked at my blackened fingers, and then I looked at him. The pride was still there. Even in the gutter, even in the tarps and the duct tape, Adam was still a victim of his own narrative. He couldn't see that he had been the one to drag me out. He couldn't see that he had gambled the mansion away. To him, the catastrophe of his life was a plot written by a mother who hated him. A mother's heart breaking twice is a quiet thing. It is the sound of a final door closing in a house that is already empty. I felt a surge of pity, so deep it transcended anger. He was my son, and I had failed him, not by being too hard, but by being the foundation he never had to build for himself. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. My fingers brushed against the vault key, the key to the DA legacy. For a fleeting, desperate second, I wanted to pull it out. I wanted to hand it to him and watch the realization shatter his mask. I wanted to see the moment he understood that the monster had been his savior. But I stopped. If I gave him the key now, he would use it to buy his way back into a life he hadn't earned. He would go back to being the man who blamed the world. He was begging in front of his own company because he still didn't understand that the company was a responsibility, not a trophy. "I'm sorry," I whispered. It was the first time I had spoken in hours. Adam scoffed, turning back to the street. "Yeah, everyone's sorry. But sorry don't pay for a sandwich, does it?" He closed his eyes, drifting into the shallow, fitful sleep of the homeless. He didn't know that the woman next to him was praying for him. He didn't know that the small, anonymous deposit that would hit Sophia's account tomorrow morning was coming from the monster sitting in the dirt. I leaned my head against the building Arthur and I had built together. The glass felt like ice. I could feel the pneumonia beginning its final siege of my lungs. My time was measured in minutes now, not years. I looked up at the DA one last time. I am Diana. I am the mother who ruined him to save him. I am the queen who died so the kingdom could stand. And as I watched my son sleep in the shadows of his own empire, I realized that the greatest revenge I could ever have was this: to let him live, to let him learn, and to let him never, ever know that the person he hated the most was the only person who truly loved him. I closed my eyes, the roar of the city sounding like a lullaby. The beggar and the prince, huddled together against the cold, two ghosts waiting for the morning that only one of them would see. The dawn did not break. It merely stained the sky with a bruised, sickly gray that offered no warmth to the shivering figures huddled at the base of the DA Legacy Tower. The air was a thick, frozen soup of city grit and exhaust, and every breath I took felt like a mouthful of glass. My vision was failing now, the world reduced to blurred shapes and flickering lights, but my mind, honed by 5 years of calculating the cost of a breath, remained a sharp, cold diamond. I knew what day it was. I knew the exact second the clock would strike the hour of my final reckoning. Next to me, Adam was a heap of trembling gray tarp. He was mumbling in his sleep, a low, feverish litany of excuses and names of creditors long since forgotten. He looked like a discarded puppet, his strings cut by his own hands. I reached out a blackened, trembling hand and touched the sleeve of his tarp. It was a final, secret benediction. He didn't wake. He didn't know that the world he had once known was about to descend upon us like a thunderbolt. The silence of the early morning was suddenly pierced by the sound of high-performance tires purring against the asphalt, a sound of liquid wealth that didn't belong in this gutter. A long, sleek obsidian sedan, its windows tinted to a fathomless black, glided to the curb directly in front of our alcove. It looked like a predator from another dimension, its polished surface reflecting the grime of the street with an indifferent, mirror-like clarity. The passenger door opened, and the scent of expensive cedarwood and new leather spilled out, a violent intrusion into our world of wood smoke and decay. Adam jolted awake, his tin cup clattering against the pavement. He shielded his eyes from the glare of the street lamps, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. He saw the car, and I watched the old, toxic hope flare up in his eyes. He thought he was being recognized. He thought a ghost from his father's past had finally come to pull him out of the mud. "Henderson!" Adam croaked, his voice a jagged ruin. He scrambled to his knees, the tarp falling away from his thin, shivering shoulders. He recognized the man stepping out of the car. It was Arthur's lawyer, the man who had presided over the reading of the will, the man Adam had cursed and spat upon 5 years ago. "Henderson, is that you? God, you found me. You have to help me. My mother, she left me with nothing. She ruined everything, but you can fix this, can't you?" Henderson stood on the sidewalk, a pillar of impeccable charcoal wool and silver-haired authority. He looked at Adam with a gaze that was as clinical and cold as a surgical blade. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a word of comfort. He simply stepped past my son, the man he had known since birth, as if Adam were nothing more than a stain on the concrete. The street went silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to press the very air out of my lungs. Adam froze, his hand outstretched, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream of confusion. He watched, his eyes wide and uncomprehending, as the high-profile attorney walked toward the disgusting beggar slumped against the granite wall. Then, the world tilted on its axis. Henderson, a man who represented the absolute pinnacle of the city's power, a man whose suits cost more than Adam's failed businesses, slowly bent his knees. He didn't care about the grease on the sidewalk. He didn't care about the grime or the smell of the street. He knelt in the dirt directly in front of me, his head bowed in a gesture of profound, ancient respect. "Madam Chair," he whispered. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of 5 years of secrets. I looked at him through the haze of my pneumonia, my heart giving one final, exhausted thrum against my ribs. I couldn't speak. I could only manage a slow, trembling nod. Henderson reached back into the car and pulled out a coat. It wasn't the tattered wool of the mission. It was a heavy, floor-length coat of midnight blue cashmere, lined with silk. He draped it over my shoulders, the warmth of it hitting my frozen skin like a physical blow. The contrast was a psychological sting that felt like a needle to the heart, the softest fabric in the world resting upon a body that had become a map of the gutter. "The 5-year trust is complete, Madam Chair," Henderson said, his voice rising so that it echoed off the glass walls of the tower above us. "The terms of your husband's mandate have been met. You have successfully shielded the legacy from those who would have dismantled it. The company, and everything in it, is waiting for your command." I felt the shift in power like a seismic event. The beggar was gone. In her place sat the architect of the empire, the woman who had owned the very pavement she had slept on. I was the secret queen of the skyline, and my reign of silence was over. Adam's breath hitched, a high, whining sound of a man whose reality had just been vaporized. He was staring at me, his face a mask of such profound shock and burgeoning horror that I felt a surge of pity so deep it transcended the pain in my chest. He looked at the cashmere coat. He looked at the kneeling lawyer. And then he looked at my face, the face he hadn't bothered to see for 5 years. "Mother," he whispered. The word was a fragile, broken thing. You were here? All this time?" The realization was hitting him like a series of hammer blows. He looked at my blackened fingers. He remembered the cup he had ignored. He remembered the monster he had blamed while she sat 3 feet away from him in the dirt. He realized that every penny that had saved Sophia's life, every anonymous grant that had kept him from starving, had been paid for by the hunger and the blood of the woman he had thrown into the storm. I tried to reach out to him, but my arm felt as heavy as lead. My mission was over. The trust was complete. Sophia was healthy, and Adam had finally found the ground. "The car is ready, Diana," Henderson said softly, using my name for the first time. "The penthouse has been prepared. Your medical team is on standby." I looked up at the DA logo glowing in the dawn light. It wasn't a gravestone anymore. It was a monument to a mother's endurance. I looked at Adam, who was now weeping, his head buried in his hands as he sat in the mud. He wasn't crying for the money. He was crying because the lie he had lived for 5 years, the lie that he was a victim, had been stripped away, leaving him naked and small in the shadow of my sacrifice. "Don't tell!" "Sophia," I managed to rasp, the words costing me the very last of my strength. I gripped Henderson's lapel with my dying hand. "Let her think. He saved her." Henderson's eyes welled with tears. He nodded, a silent promise. The silence of the street was absolute. The city was waking up, but for a brief, frozen moment, the hierarchy of the world had been inverted. The queen was being lifted from the dirt by her knights, while the prince sat in the dust, finally, devastatingly, aware of the cost of his crown. I felt the silk lining of the coat against my neck. I felt the strength of Henderson's arm as he began to lift me. But as I looked at my son one last time, I didn't see a businessman or a beggar. I saw the 5-year-old boy in the garden, crying because he had fallen into the cracks of the world. I had spent my life making sure he never hit the bottom. But as I was carried toward the obsidian car, I realized that the greatest act of love I had ever performed was letting him fall, and being the dirt that caught him. My eyes drifted shut. The mission was complete. The ledger of blood and pennies was balanced. The interior of the obsidian sedan was a sensory assault. After 5 years of inhaling the exhaust of the city, the scent of charcoal and wet pavement, the air inside was terrifyingly pure. It smelled of quiet, refrigerated power, of fine leather, sandalwood, and the absence of struggle. Henderson had placed me on the rear seat, my tattered, soot-stained rags bleeding their darkness onto the pristine cream upholstery. I was a ruin of a woman, a wreckage of skin and bone, yet I was being held with a reverence reserved for a deity. But I was not looking at the leather or the lawyer. I was looking at the man who had collapsed onto the floor of the car, his knees hitting the plush carpet with a heavy, hollow thud. Adam. He was frozen. His hands, caked in the same city mud as mine, were trembling so violently he had to clutch his own chest to keep his heart from leaping out. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a horror so absolute it looked like a physical wound. He looked at my frostbitten fingers, the blackened tips that had once been the hands that held him when he was a child. He looked at the deep, rhythmic heave of my chest as I fought the pneumonia for every cubic inch of air. He realized it then. I could see the moment the truth shattered the last of his delusions. He realized that the monster he had blamed for his ruin was the shadow that had been keeping him alive. He realized that every anonymous grant that paid for Sophia's surgeries, every cent that had bought her another month of breath, had been paid for by the mother who sat 3 feet away from him in the dirt while he ignored her outstretched hand. Mother! He choked out. It was a strangled sound, a sob that had been caught in a throat filled with the ash of 5 years of pride. No. Please, it can't be you were there. All this time. I dragged you. I threw you. Oh God, Mother, what have I done? He reached out to touch my hand, then pulled back in terror, as if my skin were made of fire. He saw the scars. He saw the map of the gutter written across my face. He saw the ghost he had created. I looked at him, and I did not feel the fire of triumph. I did not feel the cold satisfaction of "I told you so." Instead, I felt a devastating, quiet pity. I saw my son, not the businessman, not the husband, but the little boy who was finally, too late, realizing that the world doesn't move because of ego, but because of a silent, invisible foundations that hold it up. He was a man who had built his house on sand, and he was finally feeling the weight of the sea. With a strength I didn't know I had left, a final surge of maternal fire, I reached out and gripped the front of his tarp-covered shirt. I pulled him close, forcing his face inches from mine. I wanted him to see the cost. I wanted him to smell the bridge on my breath. Look at me, Adam, I rasped. My voice was no longer a voice. It was the sound of a dry wind over a grave. Look at the woman you threw away.